A bottle of Scotch whiskey landed on my porch like a grenade, wrapped in lies, sent by the son I raised with my own blood and sweat. He knew my heart was failing, knew I'd sworn off liquor to survive. Yet he sent that poison, a coward's blade aimed at my chest. I gave it to my brother-in-arms, the man who carried me through the hell of war, and watched him choke, his life draining as cyanide tore through his veins. The betrayal cuts deeper than any bullet, my own boy, my flesh, plotting to bury me. The rage burns, but the pain? It's a wound that screams, a father's heart shredded beyond repair. How do you live when your child wants you dead? This is the story of a son who tried to destroy me and everything I fought for. Bardstown, Kentucky, is my battleground now. A quiet town of rolling hills and bourbon barrels, where the air smells of malt and memory. My name's James Tucker, but everyone calls me Jim. I'm 62, a Marine who clawed through the jungles of Vietnam in 2069. My house, a weathered cedar cabin off Route 31E, holds the ghosts of my past. A faded Marine Corps flag over the fireplace, a bronze star in a chipped frame, and a photo of Ellen, my wife, gone 5 years now from cancer. Her laughter used to drown out the silence. Our son, Danny, carried that light once too, but he's been a stranger for 3 years. No calls, no visits. Not even a nod at the VFW cookouts where old warriors like me and Tom Bennett swap stories over cheap beer. Tom's my brother-in-arms, the man who pulled me from a ditch in Da Nang when shrapnel tore my leg. He's 65, still hauling lumber for his hardware store, always with a grin that says he's beaten worse odds than a bad day. His wife, Sarah, was Ellen's best friend, the kind who brings casseroles when grief hits too hard. Danny married their daughter, but even that didn't keep him at our table. He skipped the last Memorial Day barbecue, left my texts unread. "He's busy," Sarah said once, her voice tight, like she was convincing herself. I believed it then. Now, after that bottle showed up, I don't too veer. I'm staring at it now, sitting on my kitchen table, its amber glow mocking me under the morning light. What kind of son sends a gift that kills? If you're with me, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe what this bottle unleashed. The bottle sat on my kitchen table, its amber glow catching the morning light like a signal flare from a war I thought I'd left behind. I'm James Tucker, a Marine who survived the jungles of Vietnam, but nothing prepared me for this. A gift from my son, Danny, who'd turned into a ghost in my life. The Scotch whiskey was a beauty, a limited edition single malt, its wax seal gleaming like it cost more than my old Ford truck. The label read, Bardstown Distillery, 18 years, the kind of bottle you'd raise to toast a victory, not a birthday for a man who can't drink anymore. My heart condition, a souvenir from too many years of stress and shrapnel, had forced me to swear off liquor 3 years ago. Danny knew that. He was there in the hospital when the doc laid it out. No booze, no salt, no second chances if I wanted to see 65. So why this? Why now? I ran my thumb over the wax seal, smooth as a river stone, and felt a knot tighten in my gut. The card taped to the box was plain, just 2 words in Danny's sharp, slanted handwriting. Happy birthday. No. Dad, no signature. Just those words staring back like they were afraid to say more. I remembered the last time I saw that handwriting, on a note he left at 17, promising to mow the lawn before he took off with his buddies. He didn't mow it. That was Danny big promises, small follow-through. But this felt different, heavier, like the weight of a loaded rifle you don't trust. I set the bottle down, its glow mocking the chipped linoleum of my kitchen. For a moment, I thought about cracking it open, pouring a glass for old time's sake, letting the burn remind me of nights with Ellen on the porch, her laughter mixing with the crickets. but my ticker wouldn't forgive that kind of nostalgia. Instead, I thought of Tom Bennett, my brother-in-arms, the man who dragged me through hell in Da Nang and never asked for a thank you. Tom's the kind of guy who'd show up at your door with a toolbox before you even knew your roof was leaking. At 65, he still ran his hardware store on Main Street, always with a story and a grin that could make you forget the worst days. If anyone deserved this bottle, it was him. He'd crack it open at the VFW, share it with the boys, and give it a story worth telling. Me? I just let it gather dust, a reminder of a son who didn't care enough to show up. Tom will make better use of it, I muttered, buckling the bottle into the passenger seat of my truck like it was a VIP. Habit maybe, but I didn't want it rolling around breaking before it found a home. The drive to the VFW post on Route 31E was short, just past the old distillery where the air smelled of oak and bourbon. The sun was high, painting the Kentucky hills gold, but a chill hung in my chest. I pulled into the gravel lot, the crunch under my tires loud enough to drown out the doubts creeping in. The VFW was our sanctuary, a squat brick building with a neon sign that flickered open like a heartbeat. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the low hum of Merle Haggard on the jukebox. Tom was at the bar, his red flannel rolled up to the elbows, laughing with a couple of old-timers about a fishing trip gone wrong. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Jim Tucker, you old dog, what's this?" he said, spotting the bottle in my hands. "From Danny," I said, setting it on the bar. "For my birthday. Figured you'd enjoy it more than me." Tom's eyebrows shot up, his calloused fingers turning the bottle to read the label. Bardstown 18. "Hell, this is the good stuff. Your boy's got taste." He grinned, but I caught a flicker of something in his eyes, maybe the same question I had. Why would Danny, who hadn't called in years, send something this fancy? "To special nights," Tom said, raising an imaginary glass. "I'll save it for the next poker game. You in?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Heart says no, but you make it count." Driving home, the truck felt emptier without that bottle, but my mind was heavier. Danny wasn't the type to spend hundreds on a gift without a reason. Back when he was a kid, he'd borrow gas money and forget to pay it back. So why this? The question gnawed at me, sharp as shrapnel. I pulled into my driveway, the cedar cabin looking smaller under the afternoon sun. Inside, I poured a coffee, black and bitter, and sat at the kitchen table. The spot where the bottle had been was empty now, but its shadow lingered. I thought of Ellen, how she'd pour us both a drink after dinner, her smile softer than the Kentucky dusk. I thought of Danny, the boy who'd run through these fields, chasing fireflies. And I thought of that card, those 2 words in his handwriting, cold as a winter ditch. Something wasn't right. My gut, trained by years in the Corps, screamed it. I just didn't know yet how right it was. The night at the VFW was supposed to be a good one, the kind where old Marines like me and Tom Bennett could forget the weight of the years. But it turned into a nightmare faster than a mortar strike. Tom was in his element, holding court at the bar, the scotch I'd given him glowing like liquid gold under the neon lights. He raised the bottle, grinning, and poured a round for the boys. "To Jim's birthday and to brothers who make it through," he toasted, his voice booming over the jukebox. I nodded, sipping my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. Tom took a swig, his eyes crinkling with that familiar spark. Then it happened. His grin froze. His hand clutched his chest, the glass slipping from his fingers, shattering on the oak floor. The bar went silent, Merle Haggard's voice the only sound as Tom crumpled, gasping like he'd been hit by a sniper. I was at his side before I knew I was moving, my knees hitting the floor, my hands on his shoulders. "Tom, stay with me," I barked, my voice raw, the old Marine instinct kicking in. Sarah was there in seconds, her face pale as ash, screaming for someone to call 911. The ambulance roared up Route 31E, red lights slicing through the Kentucky dusk. At Bardstown General, the ER was a blur of white coats and beeping monitors. Tom lay on a gurney, tubes snaking from his arms, his breathing shallow but stubborn. Sarah gripped my hand, her nails digging into my palm. "He was fine, Jim," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He was fine." I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the empty spot where that bottle had been, now bagged by the paramedics for evidence. My gut, honed by years in the Corps, screamed one word: poison. I kept a splash of that scotch in a mason jar, a habit from my service days. Always hold on to something you might need later. Back at my cedar cabin, I called Carl Lawson, a Marine buddy who'd traded battlefields for a veterinary lab on the edge of town. Carl's voice was steady, but I could hear the concern when I told him what happened. "Bring me the sample, Jim," he said. "I'll run it through the gas chromatograph tonight." I drove to his lab, the jar rattling in my truck's cup holder, the night air thick with the scent of cut hay and bourbon barrels. Carl met me in the gravel lot, his lab coat thrown over a flannel shirt, his eyes sharp like they were back in Nam. I handed him the jar. "Tell me what's in it," I said, my voice low, the weight of suspicion pressing on my chest. By dawn, Carl called, I was in my kitchen, the coffee gone cold, staring at the spot where the bottle had sat. "Jim," he said, his voice tight as a tripwire, "it's cyanide. Enough to kill a man with a bad heart in minutes. You didn't drink it. Tom did. You're both lucky he's still breathing." My hand gripped the phone, knuckles white. Cyanide. A word that hit like a frag grenade. I flashed back to Danny's call the night before, his voice sharp over the line. "You try it yet, Dad?" I'd laughed it off, told him I gave it to Tom. The silence that followed wasn't surprise. It was something colder, heavier, like the pause before a trigger pull. "You sure about this, Carl?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I ran it twice," he said. "This wasn't an accident. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." I stood frozen, the morning light cutting through the blinds, painting bars across the linoleum. Danny knew I couldn't drink. He knew Tom would. My son, the boy I'd taught to tie a fishing knot, to salute a flag, had sent a bottle meant to kill. The rage boiled up, hot and sharp, but the pain was worse. A father's heart ripped open, bleeding out on the floor. I thought of Ellen, how she'd believe Danny could be better than us, better than the scars we carried from war. I thought of Tom, fighting for air in that hospital bed. I called Detective Mike Hayes, a former Army man who'd traded fatigues for a badge. "Mike," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside, "I need you at the hospital. That scotch wasn't a gift, it was a weapon." He didn't ask questions. "I'm on my way," he said, his tone clipped, like he'd heard this kind of betrayal before. I drove to Bardstown General, the mason jar locked in my glove box, my hand steady on the wheel but my mind racing. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear, the kind that lingers in the air after too many bad nights. Sarah was by Tom's side, her eyes red, her hands clasped like she was holding on to hope itself. "He's stable," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but they don't know why he collapsed." I didn't tell her about the cyanide, not yet. I couldn't, not until Mike got there, not until we had answers. But as I stood by Tom's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, I felt the truth closing in like a noose. My son had crossed a line you don't come back from, and I was the one who'd handed the rope to Tom. The truth about that bottle of scotch hit me like a round to the chest, but I wasn't down yet. I'm James Tucker, a Marine who's faced worse than betrayal, though none cut deeper than this. Back in my cedar cabin off Route 31E, the morning after Tom's collapse, I stood in my kitchen, the mason jar of poisoned scotch locked in my glove box, its cyanide-laced secret burning a hole in my mind. My gut, forged in the jungles of Vietnam, told me to move fast. I started with the trash bin by the back door, where I'd tossed the packing from Danny's gift. There, under a coffee filter and some junk mail, was a small plastic vial, no bigger than a shotgun shell, with a faint white powder clinging to its sides. No label, just a ghost of something deadly. I held it up to the light, my hand steady, but my heart pounding like a war drum. This wasn't trash, this was evidence. By noon, I was back at the bin, vial in hand, ready to bag it for Mike Hayes, the former army man turned Bardstown detective. But it was gone. The trash bag was there, tied tight, but turned inside out, like someone had rifled through it in the dark. My blood ran cold. Someone had been in my house, creeping through while I slept, stealing the proof of my son's crime. I checked the deadbolt on the back door, my fingers tracing a fresh scratch on the brass, thin as a razor's edge. A key had fumbled here, not mine. I'd learned in Nam to trust what my eyes saw over what my heart wanted. I strung a thread across the doorframe, low and tight, a trick from my service days to catch an intruder. If Danny was playing games, I'd be ready. I called Mike. "Someone's been in my house," I said, my voice low, the anger barely contained. "That vial I told you about, it's gone." Mike didn't hesitate. "I'm sending a patrol to check your place, Jim. Then I'm heading to Danny's. Stay put." I didn't stay put. I drove to Bardstown General, needing to see Tom, to know he was still fighting. The hospital smelled of bleach and despair, the kind that sticks to your skin. Sarah was there, her eyes hollow, sitting by Tom's bed. His monitors beeped steady, but his face was pale, like the Kentucky hills in winter. "He's holding on," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "But the doctors found something in his blood. They're calling it poison." I nodded, my jaw tight. "I know," I said. "I'm working on it." Mike called me that afternoon. His voice clipped, like he was holding back a storm. "Jim, we searched Danny's place, found a notebook in his garage, locked in a toolbox. It's got pages of notes, dosages, timings, and your name right next to cyanide. Tom's name, too." My stomach twisted, the pain sharp as shrapnel. "What else?" I asked. "A receipt," Mike said, "for that exact bottle of Bardstown 18 bought 2 weeks ago. He planned this." I closed my eyes, seeing Danny's face. Not the boy I'd raised, but the man who'd written my name like a death warrant. I remembered last summer, when he'd come to me, eyes desperate, asking for 50 grand to start a business. I'd said no, told him to earn it. Was that the spark? Was my refusal the reason he'd turned on me, on Tom? I drove home, the Kentucky dusk heavy with the scent of oak and bourbon. My cabin felt like a bunker now, every shadow a threat. I checked the thread on the door, still intact, but it didn't ease the tightness in my chest. I sat at the kitchen table, a legal pad in front of me, writing what I knew. Danny sent the bottle. Danny knew I couldn't drink. Danny's notebook had our names. The vial was gone. Each word was a nail, hammering the truth into place. I thought of Ellen, how she'd believed in Danny, even when he started pulling away. I thought of Tom, fighting for every breath because of my gift. The rage was there, hot and alive, but the pain was worse, a father's love torn apart, piece by piece. I called Mike again. "What's next?" I asked. "We're building the case," he said. "But Jim, don't talk to Danny. He's not your son right now. He's a suspect." I hung up, staring at the empty spot where the vial had been, knowing the fight was just beginning. The Kentucky dusk settled over Bardstown like a heavy shroud, the air thick with the scent of oak barrels and betrayal. I'm James Tucker, a Marine who stared down death in Vietnam, But nothing prepared me for facing my own son, Daniel, in the dim glow of the VFW bar. 2 days after Carl confirmed the cyanide in that scotch, after Mike found Danny's notebook spelling out my death, I was back at the VFW, seeking the comfort of old warriors and cheap beer. The neon sign buzzed, casting red shadows across the oak bar, Merle Haggard's voice a low hum in the background. I was nursing a coffee, my hands steady but my chest tight, when the door swung open. Danny walked in, his boots heavy on the worn floor, his eyes cold as the jungle nights we'd both read about in my old war stories. He slid onto the stool across from me, his cardinal's cap pulled low, his jaw set like he was ready for a fight. "Dad," he said, his voice smooth but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. "You shouldn't have given that bottle to Tom." My blood froze, but I kept my face stone, a trick I'd learned in Nam when the enemy was too close. I slid my phone under the bar, thumbing the record button, my heart pounding like a mortar barrage. "Why'd you send it, Danny?" I asked, my voice low, each word a grenade pin waiting to be pulled. He smirked, his eyes flicking to the bar, then back to me. "Thought you'd like a taste of something special. Guess I was wrong." The lie hung between us, thick as smoke, and I felt the rage boil up, hot and raw, a father's love twisted into something jagged. "You knew I don't drink," I said, leaning closer, my eyes locked on his. "You knew Tom would." His smirk faded just for a second, and I saw it a flicker of something dark, not regret, but calculation. "Careful, Dad," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're digging a hole you can't climb out of." My fingers tightened around the coffee mug, the ceramic warm against my calluses. I wanted to grab him, shake him, demand why he'd turned on me, on Tom, on everything we'd fought for, but I'd learned in the Corps to keep my head when my heart wanted blood. "What's in that notebook, Danny?" I asked, my voice steady, cutting through the bar's hum. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment he was the boy I'd taught to fish, not the man who'd written my name next to cyanide. He leaned back, folding his arms. "You've been talking to the cops, haven't you?" he said, his tone mocking, like I was some old fool chasing ghosts. "You always did trust the wrong people." The words hit like shrapnel, tearing open the wound of our fractured bond. I thought of Ellen, how she'd believed in him, even when he stopped calling. I thought of Tom, fighting for breath because of my gift. "You're not my son right now," I said, my voice breaking, the pain spilling out despite my will. Danny stood, his chair scraping the floor, and slid a folded note under my coffee mug. "Read it when you're alone," he said, then walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. I waited until his truck's taillights faded down Route 31E before unfolding the note. 3 words, scrawled in his sharp hand. "You're next, Dad." My breath caught, the paper trembling in my hands. The VFW seemed to close in, the neon light flickering like a warning. I called Mike Hayes from the parking lot, the gravel crunching under my boots, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Mike, it's Jim. I just saw Danny at the VFW. He left a note, says I'm next." Mike's reply was instant, clipped like a soldier's orders. "Get that note to me, now, and lock your doors tonight." I drove home, the mason jar of poisoned scotch still in my glove box, a silent witness to my son's betrayal. My cabin loomed in the dark, its cedar walls no longer a sanctuary but a target. I checked the thread across the doorframe still intact, but it didn't ease the dread. Danny wasn't just a suspect now, he was a hunter, and I was in his sights. The note from Danny, "You're next." Dad burned in my pocket like a live round, its words a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I'm James Tucker, a Marine who survived Vietnam's jungles, but nothing in those years prepared me for the pain of my own son turning predator. The drive home from the VFW was a blur. the Kentucky night heavy with the scent of bourbon barrels and betrayal. My cedar cabin off Route 31E loomed in the dark, its walls no longer a refuge but a cage where memories and threats collided. I checked the thread across the doorframe, still intact, but it didn't ease the dread coiling in my chest. Inside, the silence was louder than a mortar blast, broken only by the creak of the floorboards under my boots. I sat at the kitchen table, the empty spot where the Scotch bottle had been a ghost staring back, mocking me. Sarah's call came at dawn, her voice trembling through the phone like a cracked bell. "Jim, you need to come to the hospital. It's about Danny." I was at Bardstown General in 20 minutes, the mason jar of poisoned scotch still locked in my glove box, a silent witness to my son's crime. The hospital's antiseptic smell hit me like a punch, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on Sarah's face as she met me in the hallway. Her eyes were red, her hands twisting a tissue into knots. "He asked me about Tom's drinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Months ago, he wanted to know how often Tom drank, what kind he liked. I thought he was planning a gift. Now I'm not sure." Her words landed like shrapnel, tearing open the truth I'd been dodging. Danny hadn't just targeted me. He'd planned to erase Tom, too, and maybe Sarah if she got in the way. I followed her to Tom's room, where he lay under the hum of monitors, his face still pale but his eyes sharp with the stubbornness of a man who'd faced death before. "Jim," he rasped, gripping my arm with a strength that defied his condition. "Sarah told me about the cyanide. You think Danny meant it for both of us?" I nodded, my throat tight. "His notebook had our names," I said, my voice breaking. "Yours, mine, and dosages that don't leave survivors." Tom's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with the fire of a Marine who'd never backed down. "That boy's no son of yours anymore," he said. The words cut deeper than I expected, a blade through the heart of every hope I'd clung to. Back home, I climbed to the attic, the air thick with dust and memory. I dug through a box of old photos, searching for something to anchor me to the Danny I'd known. I found one from 2095. Me, Ellen, Danny at 8, grinning by the Cumberland River, his small hand clutching a fishing rod I'd taught him to cast. But across my face and Tom's, someone had scratched jagged lines, the ink fresh, the edges raw. My breath stopped. Danny had been here, in my house, defacing the past we'd built. The pain was a tidal wave, drowning every memory of the boy who'd called me Dad. I thought of Ellen, how she'd sing to him when he was scared, how she'd believed he'd grow into a man we'd be proud of. That man was gone, replaced by a stranger who wanted us dead. I sank to the attic floor, the photo trembling in my hands. The rage was there, hot and alive, but the grief was heavier, a father's love shattered into pieces too small to glue back. I remembered teaching Danny to shoot at 10, his eyes bright when he hit the target, the pride in his voice when he shouted, "I did it, Dad." Now those same hands had written, "You're next." I called Mike Hayes, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Mike, it's worse than we thought," I said. "Danny's after Sarah too. Check his phone, his emails, anything. He's not stopping." Mike's reply was grim. "We're on it, Jim. Stay sharp." I hung up, staring at the scratched photo, knowing the war wasn't over. My son wasn't just a threat. He was a ghost, haunting the family he'd sworn to destroy. The courtroom in Bardstown felt like a battlefield stripped of its noise. Every word a bullet, every glance a bayonet. I'm James Tucker, a Marine who faced death in Vietnam, but nothing hit harder than sitting across from my son, Daniel, as he stared at me like I was the enemy. The trial came 3 weeks after that note. "You're next, Dad," and the scratched-out photo that tore my heart to shreds. The air was thick with the weight of betrayal, the kind that chokes you worse than the Kentucky summer heat. I sat behind the prosecutor's table, my hands folded, knuckles white, the same hands that had taught Danny to tie a knot, now clenched to keep from shaking. The judge's gavel fell, sharp as a rifle shot, and the room went still, the hum of the fluorescent lights louder than my own heartbeat. Danny sat in county orange, his wrists cuffed, his eyes cold as the barrel of a gun. He didn't look at me, not at first, but I felt his gaze like a blade when it finally landed. The prosecutor, a woman with a voice like steel, laid out the case. The cyanide-laced scotch, the notebook with my name and Tom's scrawled next to deathly dosages, the receipt tying Danny to the bottle's purchase. She held up the note from the VFW. "You're next, Dad," its jagged handwriting projected on a screen for the jury to see. "This was no accident," she said, her words cutting through the room. "Daniel Tucker planned to kill his father and his father-in-law, Thomas Bennett, with cold precision." The jury's eyes darted to Danny, some shocked, others grim, like they'd seen betrayal before, but never this raw. I took the stand, my boots heavy on the polished floor, the oath a weight I'd carried since Nam. "Tell us about the bottle," the prosecutor said. I did, my voice steady, recounting the birthday gift, the hospital where Tom fought for breath, the notebook that named us both as targets. Each word was a nail in the coffin of the son I'd raised. Danny's lawyer, a slick man with a silver tie, tried to paint me as a bitter old man, nursing grudges over a son who'd outgrown me. "Isn't it true you refused Daniel money last year?" he asked, his tone smooth as bourbon but sharp as a blade. "Yes," I said, my eyes locked on his. "And I'd do it again. But that doesn't explain the cyanide." The courtroom murmured, the lawyer's smirk faltering, and I felt a flicker of the old Marine fire in my chest. Tom testified next, his cane tapping the floor, his voice rough but unyielding. "I drank that scotch," he said, his eyes on the jury. "It burned like fire, not whiskey. Next thing I knew, I was waking up with tubes in my arms." Sarah sat in the gallery, her hands clasped, her face a mask of grief and fury. The prosecutor played my recording from the VFW, Danny's voice clear. "You're digging a hole you can't climb out of." The jury leaned forward, one woman covering her mouth. Mike Hayes took the stand, his badge glinting, detailing the notebook, the receipt, and texts Danny sent to a burner phone. "Make sure it's in the first pour." The evidence stacked like sandbags, unyielding. When the jury returned, the foreman stood, his voice steady. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." The word guilty landed like a mortar round, final but hollow. Danny didn't flinch, his eyes fixed on some point above the judge, like he was already somewhere else. The judge sentenced him to 20 years, no parole, his voice calm but heavy as a war drum. As they cuffed Danny, he turned to me, his gaze cold. "Not a son's but a stranger's. This isn't over, Dad," he whispered, the words a knife twisting in my gut. The bailiff led him away, his chains rattling, and the courtroom emptied, leaving me with the echo of his voice and the weight of a father's heart broken beyond repair. The sun sank low over Bardstown, painting the Kentucky hills in hues of amber and regret. I'm James Tucker, a Marine who fought in Vietnam, but the war with my son, Daniel, left scars no metal could cover. I sat on my cedar porch, the swing creaking under me, a cup of black coffee cooling in my hand. Beside me, my bronze star glinted in its frame, next to the mason jar of poisoned scotch, its amber glow a silent reminder of betrayal. Danny's trial was over, his 20-year sentence a chain I'd helped forge, but the weight of it didn't lift. Justice had been served, cold and final. yet it couldn't stitch back the pieces of a family torn apart. I thought of Ellen, her laughter gone, and Tom, recovering but forever changed. The pain was a quiet ache now, like shrapnel lodged too deep to dig out. Yesterday, a letter arrived, Danny's handwriting sharp on the envelope. I didn't open it. It sat on my kitchen table, unyielding, a question I wasn't ready to answer. Would it hold an apology, a threat, or just more silence? I didn't know, but as a Marine, I'd learned that some battles don't end, they just change terrain. Loyalty, the kind Tom and I shared in Nam, isn't just a word. It's a choice, one you make even when it hurts. You choose who to trust, but you fight for the truth, no matter the cost. That's what kept me standing, through the cyanide, the courtroom, and the ghost of a son I no longer knew. This story hit me hard, brothers. If it moved you, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to GI Dad's Family Drama. Share what you do when trust turns to poison. Your voice matters here.